Um, Welcome everyone. It's a real pleasure to have a chat to you today. I'll probably touch on a few of the things Juanita was talking about earlier, and I want to thank Juanita as well, because over the last sort of 2 years in my role with Tri New South Wales, she's been a real pillar of strength for me and provided me with a lot of the guidance on what we've implemented over a period of time. So and even before I worked one-on-one with Juanita, it was great to hear all her presentations and guidance and the FTEM model that allowed us to get to the journey where we've got to within triathlon. So it's just a bit over 5 years ago now, I started the role as pathway manager and coach education with Tri New South Wales, and it was an 18-hour-a-week job, so it was only part-time, and I did that as whilst coaching in elite space as well. But when we looked at what I inherited there, or what we inherited there, it was we had a lot of good things in place from a lot of good people that had been in that pathway role in the past. And we had relationships and MOUs with 3 RASI programs. So they were engaged, doing a great job. MOUs existed, and some good engagement with the local community. We had a growing youth and junior daily training environments. So our sport's relatively young in comparison to many others, and having specific youth and junior training environments wasn't something that we had many years ago, but they were starting to grow as the sport started to get popular with the kids. We had a small group of really engaged coaches, and we had athletes that wanted to wear the New South Wales kit, and that was great because their aspirations were high and huge, and they loved wearing the blue, as we all do, and that was good. We realised that we weren't aligned to the FTEM model, and we needed to be for things to work for us sustainably. We also had a large dropout of athletes post-school. So for us, the cliff on the sport was HSC. Once the kids left school, we lost a lot of talent from our sport, never to return. And there were a number of reasons for that, which I'll get into later. There was a lack of specific racing, which was a problem. We've got a lot of races around that cater for our kids within the country and indeed within the state, but nothing specific that really related to the demands of competition at an Olympic level. Junior racing was seen as the pinnacle of the sport, not the Olympics. And so we had coaches, parents and athletes preparing to do, all schools, national all schools and national series races. But being the champion at a youth or junior level was seen to be the be all and end all. And we didn't want it to be. We were very results focused. We did a lot of time trials, and we actually ranked our athletes nationally in swim and run times, believe it or not within races. And that was seen as a bit of a status. And ultimately, unsurprisingly, we had a high injury rate and burnout rate for our young athletes as well. So we created a strategy where we added an extra tier to our youth and junior programs within the pathways, and that was at an under 23 level. The average age of our Olympic gold medalists around the world is 26. We're a late specialisation sport. We're endurance-based. And adding an under 23 program was going to be important for us state-wise. We increased our footprint through our RASI network, and we've now got 7 regional academy of sport programs in place. We got key coach buy-in on the pathway philosophy, and that was incredibly important from my viewpoint. So unless we had our coaches understand what we're doing and the way we're doing it and why we're doing things, then we weren't going to get the athletes or the parents buying in. So coaches were number one in that regard. And to do that, I actually brought coaches into the planning process and the brainstorming process of that journey right through the 5 years that I was there within Tri New South Wales. And to this day, we've got, some of our earlier biggest critics, now our greatest advocates. Because they were part of the journey as well. We added state level, what I refer to as Olympic style racing or draft legal style racing to our calendar. Short course, super sprints, mixed relays, which is an Olympic event for the first time in 2 weeks' time. So now we had a racing series that was like for like to our Olympic journey for the kids. Skill acquisition and process-based focus within the racing. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Transparent and aligned policy and procedure and documentation, and Juanita showed a little bit of that earlier. And importantly, being a second or a third tier sport, we don't have a lot of resources. Indeed, my role was part-time, so we had to engage initiatives put in initiatives that engaged our community, our existing clubs, our existing coaches, and brought them along the way. So it wasn't really okay. So we had our first tier of the pathway being for our high school aged kids from sort of year 7 to year 10. We didn't want sports specialisation. So one of our key messages was, we want you to do triathlon. We want you to fall in love with the sport, but we don't want you to be a triathlete. So go and do other sports, play your soccer, play your football, play your hockey, play your water polo, whatever it may be. Because getting back to Anita's point, we wanted athletes with really good motor skills and that physical literacy. And our sport is a lineal driven sport. We swim, ride and run in a straight line. So we're limited on what we can provide athletes in that regard. So by doing other sports as well, provides that opportunity to leverage off that skill set. At the 16 and 19 year level, we wanted them to start to specialise a little bit more, but also, involve themselves in other sports that were complementary, including surf life saving, swimming, cycling, and running, cross country, BMX, mountain biking, whatever it may be, and then importantly the under 23 level, which we brought our athletes into, which was more about evolving to daily training and daily performance environments around the country, getting international exposure and starting to put themselves in an environment where they could commit to the sport now that they've been confirmed as talented athletes. From an FTEM model perspective, our FTEM model basically starts at the foundational level. So our regional academy sport and roster program started at that F3 level. And we realised that our emerging talent and under 23s went through the first 3 stages of the talent model. And we felt that T4 was the time where they transitioned out of a state level model to a national level model. And that's worked really well for us. So some of the benefits we created was an absolute team buy-in at all facets of the sport. So our stakeholders, importantly, athletes, coaches, parents, and clubs. So we did a lot of parent engagement when we making change within the program. So we had the coaches on first. We communicated to the athletes what and why we were doing things, but importantly, we spoke to our parents. We educated them on our program, what we were trying to achieve and what was in the best interests of the athletes. We included state racing opportunities. Now that racing environment that we've got now, a series that we have around the state, is quite unique in that whilst we reward athletes in their genders and age groups, they all race together in heats and finals. So each race has at least 2, maybe up to 7 races over the course of a weekend. They're super short. And part of that is giving the athletes the opportunity to race, reflect, go back and race again and reflect. So mistakes they make and things they learn from a tactical and technical perspective, they can then reflect on that and then go and try to execute on in their next event that they do. So we've literally got boys racing against girls. We've got 13, 14-year-old kids racing with and against Olympians in some cases. But we've done that in a heats and finals sort of format. So our finals are graded not by age and not by gender, but by ability levels at that particular point in time. So again, it's not chronological in relation to age reward. We've had some of our girls race with our senior boys, and we've had some boys that are 16 and 17, but very late developers. So they've got a high level of skill, but they don't have the diesel engine in or the actual strength yet to be able to compete against boys their own age. But they are competing with boys and quite competitive that are a little younger, and indeed competing with the older girls. So we've been able to create an ability where there's critical mass, rather than our late developers being left out in the cold, and that's proved highly successful for us, and a lot of fun for the kids. Ultimately, we're now getting results at the under 23 elite level and above from athletes within our pathway. They're actually competing and quite often beating athletes at our national level pathway. So this has been a great success for us, and we're seeing the reward where we want it, and we're seeing results at the under 23 level and above. We're less worried about results at youth and junior level. So from a legacy perspective, what have we seen there? We've got a collaborative group of coaches. So rather than coaches working against each other and looking at each other and their relative programs as being competition, they're supporting each other. So we've got some programs where we've got, we might have one girl amongst 8 to 10 boys in a program. That coach is working with another coach that has a complete opposite dynamic, where they've got a lot of girls and less boys, and they're actually swapping athletes from across weekends, or indeed coming together and amalgamating squads for critical mass in order to do some work together as well. So some of our athletes, our programs that are out in Western Sydney or indeed Western region, are coming to the coastal coaching groups to work on open water swimming, and vice versa. Those city groups are going out of the country to do some bike sessions as well to get off the busy city roads. So that collaboration's been really valuable for the athletes. Parents understanding what and why. So one thing we know as coaches, that we're not at the dinner table and we can't control the dinner table conversations, but one thing I've certainly learned is that we can influence the dinner table conversation if parents understand. They don't have to agree, but at least they understand the methodology behind what we're doing and why we're doing it. Providing racing opportunities for the athletes to learn. Not every race is the Olympic Games, and that's important for coaches to understand and for athletes to understand, that every race is an opportunity to reflect, learn, and get better the next race that they have in place, and quite often they're more valuable than the training opportunity itself. So what's been great is that our senior athletes have given back. We've put our under 23s through coaching courses, and they've become great drivers and advocates for our culture. And indeed, at the Regional Academy Games that was held in April at the Central Coast, we had 5 or 6 of those athletes along on those camp environments with our 12, 13 and 14-year-old kids, coaching and mentoring those athletes. And they have a far greater impact than old blokes like myself trying to speak to these kids, these young athletes that are in their late teens and early 20s, are really, really valuable advocates and mentors and role models for these young kids coming through. The suite of aligned policies and procedures, and I use the word aligned because we are aligned to our national pathway framework that's in place, and every decision that we've made has been aligned throughout the journey. We've produced more athletes and more athletes that have got better quality, and importantly, we've provided fun, safe, supportive environments for our kids. And I think, it's really important that we keep it real and make sure that these kids are loving what they're doing, because I don't know a world champion that doesn't love the sport. So some take-home messages for me. The athletes need to enjoy what they do. So I think from a coach's perspective, when you're designing training sessions, don't think just about the exercise prescription component of what you're doing. Yes, we need our kids conditioned. And I think it was referred to earlier about load management. Load management's key to think about, but make sure you've got some skill objectives within each session. It's important that that's involved with a game sense sort of focus, so these kids can love what they do. They've got to learn from the journey. So being very intrinsically motivated, I see that as being, the pathway to a successful athlete. If it's a focus on one key race or one magic training session, or the medal or something extrinsic. To me, that's short term. If you've got an intrinsically motivated athlete that understands the pitfalls of a long-term journey, that's an important skill for life, not just indeed for sport. So that's important. We've mentioned racing and reflecting, and certainly for the youth and juniors, racing is about the opportunity to learn, reflect, and then execute better going forward, and taking the link between what they're doing in the race, bringing it back to the training environment, and then what they learn in the training environment, trying to execute that on race day. It's really critical. Consistency is key. I think some athletes think that, one key or magic training session or 2 or 3 week blocks is going to make them. It doesn't, certainly within our sport. Good, consistent, sensible training loads that are monitored by a coach is critical to ensure that they've got more opportunities to train appropriately, which allows them then to race in what is a healthy and injury-free body. And that's how they will progress long term. Getting the athlete to listen to their body. So give them an opportunity to understand their body and what works for them and what doesn't. So that guided discovery model within your coaching will really help them understand what works and what doesn't, and allow them to challenge themselves. I think that's really important. So being comfortable with uncomfortable sometimes is critical for them to be well prepared for the demands of competition. As a coach, building robustness is probably the key thing from my viewpoint. Plenty of athletes that I've either inherited or seen that have low energy availability. They don't eat properly. They don't drink properly. They certainly don't rest properly. They see their athletic career to be one of a priority over school, certainly in our model, school first. And parents are never going to get an argument from us in the pathway about school being first. And indeed, we recognise that athletes going through that critical period of HSC, but even big times of exams and assignments and so forth is really important to lay off the training a little bit, be a little less structured potentially, just in order to maintain that school priority. But being, physically robust, strong, try to alleviate as much stress as they can. That all helps with being, injury-free and illness-free. Have a real skill focus in every session that they do, even the ones that are exercise prescription-based. Race to learn, not always to win. They will learn to win, but they've got to learn that it's all about the process in the first instance. Life lessons in sport. So we've done a lot of camps, a lot of races where, we've got to learn tolerance with living with each other. We've got to learn how to cook and clean, be patient, be on time, personal hygiene, importantly, respect for themselves, for each other, for other coaches, good sportsmanship, those sorts of things. To me, they're no-brainers. They're life lessons, but geez, we had no better example than Ashley Barty over the last 24 hours of what a wonderful, refreshing sports advocate she is for our country. Grow as a coach, and I think the big message for me to you as coaches is never stop learning, never stop exploring, inside and outside of your sport. I think that's incredibly important. And utilize the pathway. So utilize resources and the systems that exist within state sporting organisations. There's a really big emphasis to try to develop coaches, and trying to make sure that you've got opportunities within the pathway. And I think that's important from my viewpoint. I've gone through this quite quickly, but I'm really aware of time, so I'll finish it there. But I'm happy to take questions later, or indeed send through some resources and speak to coaches if they wish at a later time.